Welcome back, brothers and sisters. I am Braden. This is Langley Outdoors Academy, and thank you for stopping by. All right, guys, what we're going to talk about on this episode is something that is really big that came out of West Virginia last week around serial numbers and carrying a firearm with a serial number or an obliterated serial number. Now, I'm not going to sit here and litigate the serial number versus no serial number, gun control versus not gun control point. What I want to dive into is the things that this judge hit on. Because this is all about means and testing. This is about passing the blessing of the Second Amendment along to the next generation and reverting to the mean, the average. Because what we've been going through over the last 50 years is not average. It's full of infringements, and that is what we're seeing the outcome of the Bruen case become. This is incredibly important. Everything's going to be linked in the description box below, and I cannot wait to hear what you guys think about this one. I'm going to say a quick word from our sponsor, USCCA, and then we're going to dive in, and again, I cannot wait to hear what you think. The USCCA is about more than just the right to bear arms. It's a resource for you before, during, and after a self-defense incident. If you're not one of the 500,000 plus USCCA members, check it out in the description box below. I have some personal behind-the-scenes knowledge that they have got some amazing learning, some resources, some great stuff that will help us in our fight for the Second Amendment and passing it along to the next generation. Thank you so much to USCCA for sponsoring this video, and there is a link in the description for you if you want to find out more. All right, brothers and sisters, so as I mentioned in the introduction, we are going to dive into this ruling that came out of a West Virginia court, making it unconstitutional to penalize someone for carrying a firearm without a serial number or an obliterated serial number. Now, there's pretty much two camps on this thought. You've got serial numbers prevent crime, and it's a gun control move to say, well, we're preventing crime because we know where all the guns are. Then you say on the other side of gun advocates and say, well, that's an infringement because that's the first step into a gun registry. I'm not going to litigate both of those points. That's not the point of this video. This is all about what the judge said for the means and testing that I mentioned, because it's changed completely since Bruen. It's only been 3 or 4 months since that ruling came down, and we're starting to see this, again, revert back to the mean of gun rights in this country, which is an amazing thing for us on the gun rights side of this argument. Everything is linked per usual. This is an article for CNN because they're starting to figure it out. Check this out. Judge blocks federal law banning possession of firearms with serial number removed. This came out Thursday, October 13th, right after the ruling. Now, this is where they're setting it up, and this is the table. CNN. A federal judge in West Virginia has invalidated part of a federal law that prohibits the possession of a firearm with an altered, obliterated, or removed serial number, citing the Supreme Court's recent decision that demands a historical review of gun laws to determine their constitutionality. One of the main tenets about this concept that we're covering is the constitutionality. It's not enough to say, yeah, is it constitutional, check or not check, but how does it affect the population? Because that's the means end part of this gun control review that's been in place the last 50 years, give or take. That's also the same concept of the idea of the NFA. The NFA was originally not accepted under the Second Amendment until it became law in 1934. This is incredibly important because as it's gone forward from the NFA all the way forward, you've had increasing amounts of infringements upon the Second Amendment, and this is another case that was not there in 1791 when it was ratified. Let's keep going because this is where it's going. The court's decision is the latest to reflect how far-reaching the Supreme Court has opened up new legal challenges to federal, state, and local gun control laws nationwide. It's actually a very well-said point of view. Goodwin, who is the judge, a nominee of President Bill Clinton, wrote that before the Supreme Court decided New York State Rifle and Pistol Association Incorporated versus Bruen last summer, the provision of the law in question would be allowed. But Bruen and Thomas' new test changed the game, Goodwin said, and that's the whole point. If you make the argument, as they did with serial numbers, about preventing crime and making sure who has the guns and then incorporating a 4473 to make sure they knew who got it, who bought it, what was the path, all of those things were not in place in 1791. Now, that goes in direct contrast to the gun control efforts to say, well, we're a modern society now. We don't even need firearms anymore. That is an ancient, archaic document. Well, no, it's the Constitution. It's a living document. It can be amended as we see fit to continue to guide our path. But the whole point here is they went with means and testing to say, well, it was different back then, but it's not the same now. That was the whole point. Notice how they didn't do that with the First Amendment when they said, like, for example, Twitter didn't exist then, so Twitter's not okay now. It's very similar. All right, let's keep going. Quote, any modern regulation that does not comport with the historical understanding of the right is to be deemed unconstitutional, regardless of how desirable or important that regulation may be in our modern society, Goodwin wrote on Wednesday. Again, there's the modern approach, basically outviewing the historical aspect of the Constitution as archaic. It doesn't matter how amazingly solid that document is. We're modern now. We're so much smarter. We're much more evolved. There's no need for a guiding document to curtail government power. Yes, there is. That's the whole point. But let's continue, because we're getting into that means-end testing. The Second Amendment was adopted along with the rest of the Bill of Rights in 1791. Quote, a firearm without a serial number in 1791 was certainly not considered dangerous or unusual compared to other firearms because serial numbers were not required or evenly commonly used at the time. At the end of the day, he's actually correct. A serial number does not make a gun less or more dangerous. It's the person using it. But that goes back to the gun rights argument. It's not the instrument that's being used. It's the person using the instrument. That's the important piece. We have a morality and a heart issue in the country, not a tool issue. But let's keep going. Quote, while I recognize there is an argument that firearms with an obliterated serial number are likely to be used in violent crime and therefore a prohibition on their possession is desirable, that argument is the exact type of means and reasoning the Supreme Court has forbidden me from considering. That part right there. Forbidden me from considering. That's incredibly important. Because while this judge wants to say, yeah, sure, the Constitution says this, but in the interest of everybody, like, I don't know, subways and in public places like the Times Square, it makes sense to infringe on the Second Amendment because it's means-end testing. The judge even says, as much as I want to, I can't. That's the power of the Supreme Court ruling because they have to abide by it. And if they don't, they're only going to have consequences. Got one more thing for you, and then we are going to kick out this day. Several other laws now face new legal challenges under the precedent. Among them, zoning restrictions barring shooting ranges, licensing and training laws, and the federal ban on certain misdemeanor offenders from possessing firearms. All of the things that we're seeing are the minutia. This is where it starts. It's going to culminate in things like the AR bans from different states being thrown under the rug. And eventually, probably the NFA challenges. I don't know how that's going to shake out, but that's where this is going. The quest to reclaim our rights from a century of gun infringements is starting, and we are in for one heck of a ride. Let me know what you guys think in the comments field below, and I will see you on the next one. I'm Braden. See you later.